Okay, we're back with us you're back with us here in Republika. We're talking to Congressman Ashley Acidillo. Sorry for interrupting you. Go ahead.
Yeah. With regard to the ruling of the International Court of Justice on the maritime
What's the significance of this?
Yes. Ang one thing that is instructive for the Philippines dito sa ruling nila is that the ruling was based on strong historical record, which the Philippines has.
Yes.
Our previous maps and the previous treaties consolidate our claim over the islands which we are claiming in the West Philippine Sea.
Okay.
Now, another point of strong contention for the Philippines is that our claim is based on supportable life in a regime of islands.
Okay.
Yung claim ng China is based on their self-declared, unilaterally announced 9-dash line.
9+1 na yan, ano?
Actually, originally it was the 11-dash line.
Okay.
For some reason, and by the way, the 11-dash line was declared by Chiang Kai-shek.
Okay.
When he was still supreme leader of China before the fall of mainland China to the communists.
Correct.
Now, it was reduced for some reason to the 9-dash line. Now, the 9-dash line is just an imaginary line drawn across the West Philippine Sea.
Correct.
It is not based on a series of claims on supportable regime of islands across the West Philippine Sea. So, based on those 2 points alone, our case is strong.
And all these historical claims that they're making are actually just navigational maps.
Yes.
These are not actual historical titles to the area.
Yes.
Because if they're going to go into historical title, they might as well claim the entire Europe because Genghis Khan went as far as Europe, knocking on European doors. So
and Admiral Zheng He also.
Yeah, and they should. We better dare them to better claim this historical title all the way down to Europe if they're strong enough, no?
That's correct.
But they're not doing it.
Now, does the issue stop there with a favorable ruling from ITLOS on behalf of the Philippines? Unfortunately, no. Why? Because this cannot be enforced.
Okay.
You would need the entire or the full backing of the United Nations to force China to abide by this ruling.
Okay.
Will they do that? I highly doubt it.
That's it. There is a senator, very highly outspoken, who says, you know, the problem with this rotational, on the rotational basis of these Americans visiting the Philippines is when you say rotational, how come they're actually staying here longer than usual? They're no longer visiting, they're actually staying. So how would you answer that statement?
Well, that's a valid point, ano? But ang sa akin naman, how long should the Americans stay for them to have substantial amount of time to train jointly with our forces?
Okay.
And we have to remember that if we are talking about a substantial number of American troops, they have to move a lot of equipment.
Okay.
So a lot of this equipment should have to stay in place. Only yung mga sundalo lang nila ang magro-rotate. Now, second point, most of our camps and our bases are not ready to absorb this increase in surge of the presence of American military personnel. Therefore, there must have to be yung mga kaukulang pag-sasaayos ng ating runway.
At posibleng sila pa gumastos nito, no?
And that is the benefit to us.
Yes.
If there is no other benefit to this other than that, I would already be thankful for that.
Do you see the possibility that they would revive Subic Naval Base?
As far as I gathered in the recent discussions of DOD and our DND, it has been discouraged yung pag-occupy nila ng mga civilian-oriented facilities like Subic and Clark.
What if part of Subic became a Philippine Naval Base?
Well, that's another story. Because in the case of Clark, meron pa ring small portion ng Philippine Air Force doon. They call it the Air Force City.
Yes.
So doon pwede. Sa akin naman, it's good on our part to discourage that para hindi naman ma-disrupt yung civilian activities.
Okay.
Now, ang tinitingnan nila na magkakaroon ng significant American military presence would be our camps and bases here in Manila.
Okay.
A portion of Clark.
Okay.
Zamboanga,
Edwin
Andrews Air Base, and headquarters of the Western Mindanao Command, Mactan Air Base, which used to be an American air base also, as well as Antonio Bautista Air Base in Palawan.
Congressman, what are we missing out? Are we so focused about the details, about the return of the Americans, that somehow we have turned our back and we are always catching, as the saying is, we're behind the facts. The facts is, we have to make a choice in this part of the world. There are only three choices. We either become a very strong nation, which means we don't need anybody in this part of the region, or we either, as you said a while ago, ally ourselves with the People's Republic of China or with the United States. With the problems in West Philippine Sea, why are there voices again, rising against the presence of the United States forces, while these very same voices are very quiet with the quiet and de facto annexation of our sovereignty, of our territory in West Philippine Sea? Why is there a dichotomy?
Alam mo, Eric, well said, no?
Oh,
well said.
Right.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Oh.
But one thing I would like to hammer home here is that the worst thing that the Philippines can do is to profit neither from a relationship with China or a relationship with the US. Because wala tayo dun sa una mong sinabi, that we are a strong, self-reliant nation. Unfortunately, we have to accept the fact that we still cannot defend ourselves to the fullest. And therefore, we must have to benefit from the relationship of from a relationship with another country. And in this case, I think the intuitive choice would be the United States.
And part of the reason, if I might add, is because they're a deliberative society. They are not an authoritarian country.
Yes.
In short, we can identify with their form of government.
Yes. When there are grievances siguro in our relationship with them, we can still take comfort in the fact that they are a democracy.
And they're not a monolithic government.
Yes.
Di ba? They have executive, they have legislative, so we can approach their constitutional processes as well.
There are still mechanisms in their own government and in their own country which we can hark back to and ask them, hey, maybe we can revisit our relationship because we feel that we are at the losing end of this relationship, assuming it comes to that. But hopefully it does not come to that, because I am fully confident naman, Eric, in the abilities of our Philippine diplomatic and defense officials that they can hammer out a very good agreement with the U.S.
Back in the 60s and 70s and even in the 80s, there was this mentality, the Americans need the Philippines so badly because of the U.S. bases, blah, 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 no? But really, was it because they were so enamored with keeping Clark and Subic that actually the Philippines did not need the presence of U.S. bases? Because siguro, at some point, actually the Philippines needed the U.S. forces precisely because it kept other foreign interests at bay from getting getting parts of the country, no?
That's correct.
So we're actually gaining from their presence. Is that what we're saying here?
Yeah, that's correct, no? Ang sa akin naman, one thing we should also not forget.
Yes.
If we take U.S. presence as a given, is that we should also not be lulled into that complacency again.
False sense of protection.
Yes, because if you're one negative side effect of the significant U.S. presence that we had before was that our military did not develop a territorial or external defense capability.
We became too dependent.
Yes, that's correct. And part of this, of course, was we were really saddled with a lot of internal security activities.
Issues,
ISO, we had an insurgency raging in the south. We had a long-standing communist insurgency. So we still have those, and we're trying to settle them, but also we should try to bring in the Philippine National Police and the local government in the counterinsurgency program so that the AFP can little by little wean away from this and project itself to a territorial defense posture.
I think what is the Richard Gordon formula still workable in this case? If you remember the Richard Gordon formula, at the height of the U.S. bases discussion, whether the Senate in 1992 would approve it or void the agreement, was let's keep the Americans, let's strengthen our armed forces, and when we're strong enough, let's kick them out. In brief, just to simplify the entire issue, just to make it as understandable as possible, let's strengthen the armed forces. And then when we are strong enough and we do not need them, let's kick them out. That was the Dick Gordon formula. Don't you think that should be our formula now?
Well, I wouldn't agree with Senator Gordon because I would consider that view as very mercenary.
Okay.
Parang pinapakinabangan mo lang pagkatapos mong
Sipain mo.
sipain mo.
Okay.
We should approach this latest round of cooperation talks with the U.S. from the perspective of mutual interest.
Okay.
It is to the interest of the Americans to secure the lines of communication in this part of the region, and we're talking about the West Philippine Sea, because I think 60 to 70% of all cargo traffic passes through that body of water.
Yes.
Therefore, it is incumbent upon the U.S., which is the largest trading country, to secure that line of communication. Now, are we going to submit ourselves in the sphere of influence of the U.S.? Well, if we allow ourselves,
they will try, of course.
Of course, they
and
will
we
do
shouldn't
that.
allow them.
We shouldn't allow them. There is nothing that precludes us from pursuing an independent foreign policy.
And our own interest in U.S. government as well. Diba?
That's correct.
Ganun lang yun. Give and take lang dapat yun.
Yes.
So, eto ngayon, the bigger picture. So, the U.S. will be here. Malacanang now says, let China read this agreement in whatever form, because we're coming up with a new agreement with the United States. Are we trying to be provocative in this statement, or what is the Philippine government, what is the Aquino administration trying to say to China this time?
That's a good question, Eric. If I were to speak for the Philippines, in reaction to the statements of China, this is how I would address them. There is nothing that precludes an independent country like the Philippines from entering into any agreement with any country. That goes the same for you, China. But in this clear case, you actually didn't give us any choice.
Correct. That's a good point, yeah. And isn't it interesting, Congressman, that this is, of course, just looking backwards. When Clark and Subic was here, did the People's Republic of China even dare to mention that Scarborough Show was part of their territory?
No mention at all.
Why is this? This is what I'm at.
They wouldn't even go near that place.
Precisely. Why? Why is this? And if my information is correct, this was a target area, a practice area for our armed forces, no?
Yes, that's correct.
So, you mean to say they were quiet all the time? And yet, if we are to believe them, this was part of their territory, so that means their territory was being violated at that time. I mean, to look at it from their perspective.
Why didn't they speak up?
Why didn't they speak up? Precisely.
Yeah.
If historical title is continuing occupation or presence in the area, then they failed in those terms.
They should have lost by default.
Because
They were in default in terms of presence in that area for a long, long time.
now, the recent statement of the Chinese foreign minister said, "We will never tolerate the Philippines' illegal occupation of Ren-Ai Reef,"
Which is Ayungin Shoal.
which is Ayungin Shoal. Now, Manila plans to challenge the Chinese naval blockade by resupplying the LST there, which is stuck there, no?
Yes.
So, how do you see it playing out?
If I were to advise our government, I would say that we persist. First of all, because it is our humanitarian duty to do so. Mamamatay sa gutom ang ating mga sundalo doon.
Kawawa yung
Our
mga sundalo
sailors.
natin, yes.
Now, second, if we do not do this, despite clear attempts from China to preclude us from doing so, then it is now us who lose by default.
Kasalanan na natin.
Yes.
Bumahag ang buntot natin sa simpleng pananalita.
Yes. Anyway, sa akin naman, is this worth pushing the envelope? Yes, of course.
Yes.
Now, if they start shooting,
This is the line